So I really do enjoy the aspect of just meeting different divers around the world and meeting a lot more experienced divers than me and being able to chat and kind of pick their brain. And I feel like I learn something new every time I speak to somebody. Off-Gassing, a scuba podcast with host Nick Hogle. In this Takeover episode, Simon Bailey interviews Nick Hogle. Yes, the tables have turned, and I now join as a guest to share my journey. It was amazing to sit down with Simon and cruise down memory lane from my first breaths through my progression. A story that starts in Thailand, grows in Texas, enhanced in Mexico, and continues to flourish in Southeast Asia. I think there's some chat about a podcast somewhere in there as well. Please enjoy.
So, I mean, you always start your interviews off with why did you get into diving, first breath underwater and all that sort of stuff. Just for the record, I know you have sort of talked about bits and bobs of it all around, but I think it would be a great idea just to get everything in a coherent story.
So, my first breaths underwater. Wow, the tables really have turned. So here I am telling my story. I was backpacking in Thailand. I think it was like 2015, 2014. It was January, so it was basically, I want to say maybe it was 2016. And just typical backpacker going around. I knew I was going to be around a lot of beaches. So when I got to Thailand, the first thing that I did, I ended up picking up a really cheap snorkel kit. I wish I would have kept it. It would have been so funny to keep. The last day I was in Thailand, I just threw it in the trash because I knew it was really cheap. And I'm like, I'll just keep this, for the trip and then chuck it at the end of the trip. So when I started going to these beaches and started snorkeling around, I never realized how much life was under the water. I started seeing all this fish. Obviously, it's very colorful. I'll come back to the colorful part in a minute, but really colorful, a lot of life. And as I was going through my travels, it kind of didn't occur to me to go scuba diving until I was on Phi Phi Island in Thailand. And I was staying at this resort, and they had a dive shop at the resort. I've looked into this because I forgot, but it's Black Tip Scuba, I think is the name of the dive shop. It's on a resort, Phi Phi Beach Resort, I believe. I walked in there, very interested, like, oh, what's the scuba diving thing? And I remember, I always tell the story, it's a big French guy. Like about a year ago, I found out it was not a French guy, but some somewhere along that lines, because I ended up running into people that knew the guy that took me out for the first time. And, he's like, oh, you're going to love scuba diving. I remember he told this story. He was like, oh, you're going to see Nemo and all his friends. You're going to see sharks. And I remember I stopped him. I was like, wait a minute, I don't want to see sharks. What are you talking about? Because I'm thinking Jaws, I'm thinking all the Hollywood bad stuff. And, he corrected my misinformation. Was basically like, no, you're going to love it. They're not what you see on TV. It's vastly, vastly different. So I signed up for it. It was just to discover scuba. And he's like, okay, show up to the pool the next morning. And I showed up to the pool the next morning. And it was actually this guy. I'll never forget his name, and I haven't met up with him since, but I, follow him on social media and everything. But we went into the pool, just did, a quick skills circuit, whatever you want to call it. Just a typical, I call it, the not Caribbean, but just, tropical, typical discover scuba dive. We were in the pool for what felt like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. It might have been longer. It might have been shorter. I can't really remember because everything's happening so fast. And he just ran me through a couple skills. He's like, okay, cool. The mask removal, remove and replace the reg. Those are the two that I remember doing. And I think, definitely he had to have told me to clear my ears. But when you're in that, it's a very shallow pool. Like, I think if we stood up, we're above the pool. So it's not like there wasn't that much pressure to the point where my ears needed to be cleared. And to be honest, I don't really remember much, like the fitting or getting into the gear. He's just like, I remember he was super excited because he's like, it's just me and you today, so it's almost going to be like a personal Discover Scuba Dive. So it wasn't those stories you hear about like 15 people just, making their way to the water into a Discover Scuba Dive. I'm sure we've all heard the stories, and I know I've seen some stuff. But yeah, I remember we went into the water, and I remember he was telling me, he's like, okay, the biggest thing is, if we're down on the depth, we don't want to come back up top to fix a problem. So I think that was the mass clearing skills, the regulator recovery. He was telling me that. So he's like, this is why we're learning these skills. And I remember we're descending down in my head. I'm like, okay, we can't pop back up. We can't just pop back up. And my ears were hurting. And I was like, dude, this is not good. Something's wrong. And then it clicked in my head. I was like, okay, I need to clear my ears. Cleared my ears. And I feel like the rest was history. It was the most amazing experience. I wish I remembered more of it, but I just remember that seeing everything, I thought it was so absolutely beautiful. It kept reminding me of the movie Avatar. That's all I kept thinking about was Avatar. I'm in Pandora. I'm in Avatar. Everything's so colorful. There's life everywhere, which is really funny because I went back, I think like a year or 2 years later, and I'd been to Indonesia at that point, so I really saw color. And I remember being like, man, this isn't what I thought, or this isn't what I remember, but it was so amazing. Just the first initial time was so amazing. I just remember it having such an impact on me. I was so blown away. And then at this point of the trip, it was kind of towards the end of my backpacking trip, so the funds were running a little bit low. I wasn't quite sure. I mean, us Americans and our tipping, so I wanted to, compensate the guy somehow. And I remember we got back to the resort, and I was like, hey, I don't have like a ton of cash, but, let me buy you a couple of beers. And we just ended up having a few beers, and he's like, well, hey, me and some of the other instructors are going over to a local's house. He's cooking up a big feast. Do you want to join? And the night went on, and we were just drinking, having a blast. It was so much fun, eating a bunch of food. And I remember telling him, I have a picture too. I'll have to share it at some point. It's on my Instagram account, where I took a picture, and I remember telling him, I'm like, I'm going to become certified. At that point, I wasn't trying to be an instructor or anything, but I'm going to become certified. This is going to be like something I'm planning on doing. And then it took like, I think a year-ish, right around a year, until I actually got certified. Went back home to Texas. I didn't know that there was scuba diving in Austin, Texas, which later I found out that there was. But yeah, those first breaths had such an impact. Absolutely, it blew my mind. So what's crazy is last year, I think it was like last April or 2023. God, we're in 24 now. We were at the dive shop where Becca had just gotten certified. I think she just completed her advanced open water class. And I was sitting there talking to the owners of the shop, just telling them about this whole experience. And they're like, what was the guy's name? And I'm like, oh, his name was Ian, guy from England. That's all I remember, this guy Ian from England. They're like, Ian, and they pulled up his picture, and I was like, holy shit, that's him. They were like, he was just here last week just hanging out. I was like, holy shit, what a small world. And then that's when I was informed that it was not a French guy. Because, I mean, I'm so bad with my geography, so I can't remember where they said he was from. But in my head, forever, it will always be he was a French man, like a big old buff French dude that, conned me into it. The English guy took me out, and then, everything just changed after that.
You said you went back to Texas. Is that where you then got certified?
Yes. So went back to Texas, doing the normal 9 to 5 routine. I was a welder in the semiconductor industry back in those days. And it still had such an impact on me. I'd chat about it from time to time. And I remember I was at a bar after work. A lot of stories revolve around alcohol.
I was going to say, I can sense a theme here.
It's life water, right?
Yeah.
So I was at having happy hour drinks after work. I'm kind of a talkative individual, if people haven't caught on to that. And I was just randomly chatting with this guy at the bar, telling him about this experience. Like, oh, I can't wait to travel and I could go and get certified. And he was basically like, hey, there's diving here in Austin. And it didn't click at the time, but there's a huge lake in Austin, Texas, Lake Travis. Makes sense that there would be diving. And there's actually a thriving dive scene to come to find out, and a lot of diving history there actually too, which is kind of crazy. Our historical figures in the industry, I feel like, kind of just descend to Austin, Texas for some reason. So I started looking into it, and I remember I went into one shop. which oddly enough, a few years later, I ended up working at that shop. But it was kind of funny, and I hate to say this now, but well, it's different owners now, so it's a different story. But I remember I just kind of walked in there, and I was like, okay, this is cool. I wasn't really feeling the vibe. I didn't know that there was other shops at the time, so I'm like, okay, this is the shop that I'll become certified at. And then as I was talking to somebody else at work, they're like, well, there's a couple of shops in Austin. You should go check this other one out. And I strolled into a shop called Tom's Dive and Swim. Walked in there and just immediately clicked with the people that worked there. Just was like, okay, this is the shop that I want to become certified at. And they're an SSI shop. Signed up for an open water course. And I'm not sure how it is in other places, but when you sign up for a course, generally they require you to buy your own mask, fins, and snorkel. And obviously with the fins comes the boots. Most of the shops over there don't do the full foot fin. Probably like $300 or $400, because I got the little bit of the nicer. I mean, you know how you walk into the shop, you're like, oh, I don't want the cheap mask. I need to spend you get a little bit more of the expensive one. And I'm not embarrassed to say this, but it's kind of funny. I was talked into buying split fins, so I did have split fins my first.
I'm not going to judge you, at least not loudly.
Yeah, I judge myself. So yeah, I bought some split fins. I think there were Tusas. So yeah, I went in and I think it was, if I recall correctly, we met for 2 days, and then we met for 4 days, and then on the 5th and 6th day we went to the lake. And my instructors at the time, a person by the name of John McAlpin and Stace Swear, I think is his name. I'll have to look. It's on my cert card. I'll have to look. Another embarrassing thing to say, but you've heard me say Texas cold so many times, I'm sure, on the podcast. So, you're in a nice warm pool during the confined water sessions, heated pool, enclosed area, super nice. And then we had to go to this area called Spring Lake. It's a natural spring. There's this little section that they allow scuba training in. What's nice about it is the water is 70 degrees year round. So I remember we show up the first day, and it was, kind of like a typical Texas November. It was pretty warm out. It wasn't too bad. And I was just pumped. It was super nice, clear water. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And then the next day in Fahrenheit, it was like around 26 or 27 degrees, so just below freezing. And it was super windy at the time. And I remember when we walked up to the lake, you could just see the steam coming up off of the lake because the water temperature was so different. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, what the hell am I doing? This is so dumb. Why am I here? And the instructor had all these little tricks that he would do. So in between dives, he had a bunch of hot water and he would pour it down our wetsuits. But when you were in the water, it wasn't too bad. It was just when you got out of the water, like, most people know in wetsuits, cold weather, it just sucks.
Yeah, but you haven't experienced real cold weather until you come out of the water and your beard freezes.
And that's what I'm saying. So I do get slightly embarrassed depending on who I'm talking to, because I was freezing down there. Like, I tell people, I've been diving in cold water. It's like, oh, where have you been diving? I'm like, I've been in Texas in the winter, and it's laughable, believe me. And then I did the course. Had an absolutely amazing time. I was absolutely sold on... I wasn't sold on this. I sold myself on it because I was just so gung-ho about doing more. There's the chart that you walk into any dive shop, like, oh, here's the open water, here's the advanced, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And
you look at the bottom right and you say, that's where I want to be. Yeah.
So it was winter time, and they weren't offering a lot of courses till springtime came around, when warmer weather was coming around. So I couldn't do my advanced course, but I knew I wanted to sign up for something else. So I ended up going into a rescue course, which, looking back on it, I have different thoughts on this. I think that it's great that I went through the rescue course that early, but at the same time, I should have gotten more dives in between the courses. I mean, we all look back and like, oh, hindsight, right? So I remember having kind of a more of a difficult time. I feel like the more familiar you are with your equipment, the easier those courses will be. Going through the course, there was me, the instructor, and they had basically they found somebody else to kind of be my buddy. I think it's really good that I learned it that early, but looking back on it, I just wish I would have had a little bit more time. I can't remember. I think it was probably like a few months, but I didn't have really any dives in between. Looking back on it like a year after, being like, oh, I wish I would have spent a little bit more time. But at that point, I was just gung-ho. Like, classes are the way that I can dive, so I'm going to, I'm going to sign up for classes. So that's basically what I did. And then when the springtime rolled around, I did advanced. And then, just kind of moved through the ranks and taking classes. I do want to say with my open water course, looking back on it, I'm very happy how it went down because they instilled in me such a concept of safety. I ended up, doing a lot of solo traveling, and for anybody that's done that knows, when you're solo traveling and you show up to a dive boat, you don't know anybody on the dive boat, right? Like, you have no clue what their skill is, but then you start talking to them like, hey, how long have you been diving? I've been diving this long, blah, 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 blah. But you don't get that team cohesion that teams that go out like every weekend and they work together. The way that they went about it, I felt very safe going out and doing solo traveling.
So what happened after that? So you went through the Dive Master instructor pathway. Was that with SSI or with Paddy?
It was with SSI. At the time, it was called the Dive Control Specialist.
Yeah.
DiveCon is what they called it. The shop called it. What is it? If you do the Dive Control Specialist, you make your way up to assistant instructor.
I mean, the way it works right now, or the way it worked when I signed up last year, they've changed it again, was Dive Control Specialist became what they call a dive guide.
Yes. Okay.
Which is where you can do guided dives. Then if you took the theory course, Science of Diving, you'd get the Dive Master rating for free.
Yes. Okay.
And then with the Science of Diving and the Dive Master rating, it's still non-professional, but then you can sign up to become a professional, and then you can go into the instructor training. But you need the Dive Master to go into the instructor training.
Okay. So I was on my way to becoming a dive master. I made it to dive guide. I hold that certification in SSI. I signed up for the program, and it was kind of funny. The two instructors, super nice guys, super thorough. They were kind of like that militaristic style. I'm not going to lie, I felt kind of weird first going into it. Obviously not very militaristic. And I remember I was in the course with a guy who was on Texas SWAT, this big guy who like literally looked like he could have been in the UFC. This other like firefighter guy. I remember I was like definitely the odd one in the bunch. Like, here I am, just like surfer stoner Nick, although I'm not a stoner, everybody out there, I don't smoke or anything. So it was just kind of an odd fit up, but I ended up going through the program. And then it was funny. I was actually just saying this on the podcast the other day. My biggest goal for the longest time, and even still today, is I always try to get the most amount of diving for the cheapest way possible is my goal. So at this point, I had spent a month in Indonesia diving around as I was kind of in the middle of the dive guide program. So I saw that there was this whole other side of the industry, right? Like, you have the Texas freshwater divers, inland divers. It's very different than now you go to Indonesia, and it's just a very different scene. And I kind of fell in love with that whole scene. So my goal was I basically went back a year after my first trip to Indonesia, and I completed a PADI Dive Master internship. Technically did 2 Dive Master programs. Sorry, I feel like I'm rambling now. Sorry.
Don't worry.
Is this what guests feel like? So I after the PADI Dive Master program, I went back to Texas, and my whole goal was, I'm like, oh, okay, I'll work as a dive master for the summer. So I went with the PADI shop. At this point, they had gotten new owners. The guy by the name of Seth, still super good friends with him. I was chatting with him the other day, and basically went through my IDC. I wasn't planning to do my instructor course there, but just the way that it ended up, the course director there is absolutely amazing woman by the name of Karen Erickson. For all of you that don't know out there, Patty was started by Ralph Erickson, and Karen Erickson is, Ralph has passed away, but Karen Erickson was married to Ralph Erickson. She's still an active course director in the Austin, Texas area, and her daughter, Karina, still teaches. They have a whole Girl Scout scuba program over there. To my knowledge, it's the only one in the United States. So when I started chatting with her, I was like, I have to do my instructor program here. Like, I have to do this here. It's I think this is such a cool thing. Yeah, so I ended up just doing my IDC there. COVID happened kind of like as I was finishing up the IDC. So I was planning to go and do the IE, but then they canceled all the IEs. So this was 2020. And then as soon as the IEs opened up, I'm not going to say I was I'll have to look into this, but I feel like we were probably like the first few IEs that they held post-COVID. It was such a weird thing. It was in Nacogdoches, Texas.
Another topic that's sort of been going through the podcast, I haven't listened to all of the episodes, I'm about 5 or 10 behind, but one topic that's gone through is rebreathers. I think there was a whole spate of episodes sort of towards the end of last year, beginning of this year, where every single guest you had on, you were sort of asking them about rebreathers. It was something that came up every time. I was sort of waiting for the question at some point in the episode, so which was good. But so tell me a little bit about that. So I know that you have bought a unit now. I can't remember if you've sort of said on the podcast which one it is.
So yes, and for all you folks out there that probably don't know, and now here I am and full on admitting it. Usually when I want to find something out, I'm like, okay, I have this resource where I could chat with a lot of other divers. Let me ask them questions that I want to know. So that's the reason why I run this whole podcast, is just to get information out of people.
There you go. You've just answered one of my questions further down the line, which is, why did you start the podcast? Okay.
But yeah, so April of 2023, I took my advanced nitrox decompression procedures class. Really enjoyed it. So that was kind of my first, not even kind of, that was my introduction kind of into technical diving. I mean, depending on what you want to call technical diving, but decompression diving, where I'm doing deco, going a little bit deeper, staying a little bit longer. I started asking about trimix, mixed gas, go deeper, more clear-headed, just all around better for you. And I feel that the wave is kind of going away from open circuit mixed gas, just the prices of everything. So I feel like kind of the general direction people are going away from that. And this is what I was told too by the instructor. He's like, hey, if this is something that you're going to get into, you might as well start looking at a rebreather. So I started, the countless episodes of me just asking rebreather questions, because it's a tough thing to decide which unit is for you. And I think that if you are in a shop and you're surrounded by groups of people that are diving a unit, then it's kind of an easier choice for you, right? Because it's like, okay, this is the unit everybody else is diving. This is the unit I should get into. Living in Malaysia, I don't have that core team that I go out and dive with every weekend that I can build those skills with. I'm kind of just floating around here and there. So I'm like, okay, well, really the options are open. So what unit should I go for? And at first I was going to go for a back mount unit. I was looking at the Revo, and to be honest, I'm still kind of looking. If I could find a good price on one, I'd probably pick one up. But I do a lot of side mount diving, so I started looking at side mount rebreathers. I did my advanced nitrox deco procedures in side mount. I took a side mount course in Mexico. I knew at some point I was going back to Mexico to get into full cave. And this was all going to be in side mount. And so I ended up picking up the Fathom Gemini. It's a really solid unit. I did all my training in Mexico, and that was back in June. Unfortunately, I have not been back on the unit, but basically the 1st of November, I'm flying out and I'm bringing the unit, and I'm spending a month out in Indonesia just trying to build up hours on the unit. So I'm going to get back in the unit, which I'm really excited about. So yes, I bought the Fathom Gemini. I'm very happy with it. I had a great instructor in Mexico. At the current moment, I am a full cave diver that is CCR certified, but that doesn't mean shit because, I still need more time in the caves. I still need more time on the unit. So I always feel weird telling people like, yeah, I'm a CCR diver, but I'm a baby infant CCR diver. So I need to get more time on the unit.
Just out of interest, how did you find the transition from open circuit to rebreather?
So I had done a couple tri dives on some units, the Revo, Liberty Side Mount, and Choptima. So I kind of knew the mechanics of it. Biggest thing that I still will need to work on is the depth changes. So if I could go out and stay at 10 meters the whole dive, I feel like it wouldn't be very difficult at all. When you're dealing with open circuit and a dry suit, you just have two sources of air that you have to deal with, or gas. You have your wing, you have your dry suit, right, for your buoyancy. And generally, I don't.
And
and your lungs. You're right. I generally don't do too much with my dry suit. I started playing around with it more when I got when I was going through the rebreather course. But now you're going from 10 meters to 5 meters. I have my wing, I have my dry suit, I have the counter lung, and I was a fucking mess, dude. Like it was tough. I'm not gonna lie. But if I could stay at the same depth, I could manage everything. So when we would go down to like 30 meters and then we would come up and do stops, oh man, I was having some challenging times. So it's something that I need to work on. I don't want to say it's easy by any means. I definitely feel like it was manageable, but if too much starts happening at once, obviously I get task overloaded and then it all just goes to shit. But if I move really slowly, we're really good. But so I started playing around with it, and I still need a little bit more time. Like, okay, I'm just going to use my dry suit. I'm not going to add any gas to my wing. It's a mess. So wasn't the most difficult, but definitely not the easiest, to answer the question.
Yeah, I totally get that because I did 6 dives on a semi-closed rebreather earlier this year.
What unit?
That was the Marius Horizon.
How did you like it?
It was really good. Everybody was telling me beforehand, yeah, buoyancy is going to suck. You're going to have major problems with buoyancy. But I actually found the buoyancy wasn't too hard. What was really, really confusing is that on open circuit, you just sort of like you're sort of hovering. You sort of know where you are. Take a deep breath and you start going. Or you breathe out just to drop down. You do that on a rebreather, you don't move. And it's, but I also understand what you're saying about the dry suit because I think on the first 2 dives, I was trying to use the wing and just putting enough air in the dry suit just to sort of keep the dry suit squeeze away. And I was just finding it really hard to juggle with the wing, and then ended up doing more with my dry suit and less with the wing. So just enough in the wing just to keep your balance. But then for all of the minor changes in the dry suit, because then you could just stay in trim, you just lift your shoulder and it bubbles out. I mean, it's a very wasteful way of doing it, but it made it a lot easier for me just to sort of use the dry suit a little bit more for buoyancy.
Yeah.
And I do need to go back and finish that course. So I think I've still got about 55 minutes of runtime to be able to get signed off on the unit.
Okay.
It was interesting. So like all of the procedures with bailout valve, switching back to open circuit and sort of closing, opening the loop, how to drain the loop and all that sort of stuff. That was really good. I did have one incident where we confined water, taking a mask off, putting a mask back on, and I managed to pull the chin strap of the loop off as well. So I ended up pulling off the loop and my mask, and then everything went to shit. And it was right. Sorry, we're going up at this point. It was,
and it sucks too because it all happens so fast. Like when it starts to tumble downhill, it happens really, really fast.
Yeah, when it goes wrong, it goes.
Yeah,
wrong.
When it rains, it pours. Right. What's funny and I don't have a gripe with them because I was told it's just kind of different depending on where you dive or whatnot. But so when I was in Mexico, I still have it. It's in the closet right now, but I have the waterproof D7 dry suit. And my only gripe with it is if you look at it, the dump valve on the shoulder is very far forward.
It's sort of like on your biceps rather than on the outside. Yeah.
And someone was telling me like, oh, this is meant for, very cold water, back mount, whatever you want to call it, kind of out of trim diving. And, in Mexico, you're going through caves, going through training and everything. You want to be in trim. It's just a whole thing. So I was always having a lot of trouble dumping gas from my dry suit. even when I was going through the fundamentals course, that was one of my biggest problems, to the point where I almost have to get like vertical because of where the dump valve is. It's just kind of weird.
Yeah, I sort of see that.
I remember my instructor was kind of saying like, yeah, that is kind of in an odd spot. And then when you look at them, when you literally like look pictures of it, you can kind of see where they sit, and it is kind of an odd spot. So that's why I got used to never putting any gas in my dry suit at all. I just was like, okay, I'm going to get just enough for the squeeze, and that's it. I recently got a new dry suit, and I was able to go and play around with it, and oh my God, it's like night and day. It's so much better.
Is that a Santi one?
I got an SF Tech.
SF Tech. Oh yeah, they're really nice suits as well.
And now I play around with it a little bit more, because I've actually found that I really enjoy adding just a little bit of air to my feet, and it kind of can pop you in that trim. And I feel like it's cheating, but use what you have to make things easier.
Actually, on my fundies last week, I was always putting just enough air in my suit to minimize the squeeze. And something they told me was put more air in your suit, because then your legs won't drop. That's something I've actively been working on now. It's a little bit less air in the wing, bit more air in the suit, and it actually makes it more comfortable. And it's just clicked now for the trim stuff.
It's so nice. And then once you get it solid and you can feel it, you're like, dude, this is fucking awesome, because you're cruising through. But the problem is, as soon as you change that depth and you're getting shallower, if you can't dump any of that air, you're fucked, right? So it's like, so I was having a lot of trouble, but now it's a little bit easier. So that is my one gripe with the waterproof dry suit, is where the dump valve is located. But now I basically still keep that dry suit around just in case I need to get into a pool. I don't want to bring the SF Tech in there. So I'll bring the waterproof. So I've been playing around with doing a little bit more in the dry suit rather than the wing. It is what it is. And that was actually a conversation that I got into a little bit ago, was like, do you use your dry suit for buoyancy? Which it's not necessarily buoyancy, I guess, but I guess you could call it that. But I don't really look at it like that. It's kind of a weird thing, but.
That's actually an interesting one, because the agencies teach it differently. I did my dry suit course with SSI, and SSI says dry suit is not buoyancy. It's basically you put air in there to combat the squeeze, but your wing or your jacket or whatever is your main source of buoyancy. Then I went to Silfra in Iceland last year, which is why I did the dry suit course. And our guide there, he's a PADI instructor, and he was just sort of running through with the other people in my group who weren't experienced with dry suits. I wasn't either, but he said, yeah, don't forget, dry suit is your main source of buoyancy. And I was just thinking, yeah, that doesn't sound right. And then you go into a technical course and they say you've got two sources of buoyancy. You've got your wing and your dry suit, but your dry suit is your backup. Your main source of buoyancy is your wing, full stop. Your dry suit is only there if everything goes to shit and you're diving steels and you really do need that source of buoyancy. Then you can use your dry suit for buoyancy, but it's uncontrollable. So it's a philosophical one, which is why I did feel really bad about using my dry suit on the rebreather for buoyancy, because it was easier, but it wasn't the right thing to do.
And obviously, most people come in as a recreational diver, and you learn like this whole way of doing things, and then when you start progressing and going further in, it's like, oh well, no, forget what that person said, do this,
forget everything you've learned up until now, because you're doing it wrong.
So it is kind of funny, but and that's why I'm actually really excited about getting out to Ahmed, because I'm bringing the dry suit. I'll be able to get more time in the dry suit, get more time on the unit, because I think the goal is to eventually be able to make it into the caves with the unit. I mean, that's why obviously the Gemini was built. It's an explorer, unit, but a lot of people use it all over the place. But I'm pumped just to be able to get more time on the unit, because it was a big investment, and at points I was like, damn, did I make the right investment? Not on the unit, but just getting into a rebreather in general. This year I've been able to dive more. It's been a little bit more traveling, a little bit different types of diving. But next year, I'm hoping to be able to get more diving in, more time on the unit, more time in caves. I was invited to go mine diving like a month back, and if I was around, I would have went, but mines kind of scare me a little bit more than caves. I would like to do some wreck overhead diving. I've done a little bit, but also kind of scare me a little bit more. A structure that's been there for, tens of thousands of years is, I feel like, more likely to hold up than a mine that was made by a person 100 years ago.
It's actually funny you say that, because I've got a very good friend he's a National Geographic cave photographer, and we had this conversation with my ex-girlfriend, he and his wife, and we were sort of sat there, and she was saying, don't you get scared in caves? He says, no, I don't get scared in caves, I get scared shitless in mines. Because mines will collapse, caves won't.
Yeah. You know what's funny though is I was having this conversation with this guy Faz from Australia, and he was making actually a really funny comment. He's like, dude, it depends where the mine is, because he's like, you go out to Germany, he's like, I'll trust German engineering any day of the week.
Have you been in some of the old German mines? Bloody hell.
So I was like, okay. But I do see a lot of posts. I have some friends that were diving in the mines in Europe this summer, and I think it's about slow progression. Obviously, eventually I'd like to try one. But I do know that there's a few mines in Malaysia that people are diving. There is a group, which hopefully I'll be able to join them. They're going to be doing some mine diving just like a couple hours north of where I live right now.
Is that the group round Miko Pazi?
No, they are out as well, but there's a group in Malaysia called the Malaysia Cave Diving Association.
Okay.
And Miko's with Bottom Line Projects, who does amazing shit all over Thailand, all over Southeast Asia. And this group, they're just kind of exploring around Malaysia, a little bit Indonesia, and they're a little bit of a smaller group. And I met with one of the guys in charge of it a couple weeks back, and basically it was just kind of getting my foot in the door, being like, hey, I'll carry your tanks, I'll make your coffee, let me just come and hang out, just
please let me go with you.
Just slowly get my foot in the door, because as much as I want to go and find Virgin Cave and lay fresh line, I'm not at that point yet, right? So trying to take it slow, so we'll see what happens. Although I did find some caves a couple weeks ago in Indonesia, so I'm kind of excited.
Talking of Indonesia and caves, have you been following Expedition Nixie?
Yes, I have. I'm actually really jealous, because I was there in September. I was in South Sulawesi, just on the other leg of South Sulawesi, as everybody was arriving to Bao Bao. And I passed a couple of people in the airport, and I was just like, damn it, I want to go. I want to hang out with you guys. But yeah, they're doing some amazing stuff out there. For anybody listening, if you're, full cave diver, make it out to Bao Bao. The caves there are absolutely amazing. Everything is opening up. There's like a group of 28 people, and a lot of divers, a lot of really, really extraordinary divers. They're doing some really cool stuff out there, and I'm hoping to make it back out there in January. So I was just in Bira, Indonesia, and which is the other leg. Like if you look at South Sulawesi, there's basically like two legs of Sulawesi, and where Bao Bao Nixie Expedition is, that is the east side of it. I was on the west side of it. Very remote place, absolutely phenomenal diving, like holy shit, phenomenal diving. It's very quiet. There's only a couple of dive shops. Actually, I was, Robin had been there, obviously. He put a line in, but there was a really nice cave. I just went swimming in it. I didn't have any of my gear to go, and didn't have gear or somebody to go diving with. But just kind of talking to people in the area and just looking, I feel that there's more caves out there. So we'll see. But either way, I'll be back hopefully out in Bao Bao in January, because I'd like to take a course with Robin.
Cool. So, how was Mexico?
Fucking phenomenal, man. I want to go back. I didn't even want to leave. Absolutely amazing instructors. Big shout out to Aria. Still chat with her. She's kind of like became a mentor to me.
I'm actually in the middle of listening to her episode.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, she's super awesome. I basically chat with her, anytime I have a question. Yeah, it was just an absolutely amazing time down there. I spent I think it was almost 6 weeks down there, 4 weeks for the cave training. Did my cavern and intro with Arya, and then I did my full cave with Vince, who is co-owner of Under the Jungle. And then I went down to Third Dimension and worked with Geo to complete the training on the Fathom Gemini, and Gio was super cool. He was a very, very nice guy. I'd like to eventually make it back there and do more courses with him. Kelvin at Third Dimension, super interesting, super funny guy. A lot of stories. It was great. Just kind of sitting down, chatting with him, having a few drinks. He was a really nice guy. And Gio was awesome. But yeah, Mexico is so amazing. I fucking love that place so much. It's such a cool place, and I'm hoping to make it an every year thing. I don't know if my bank account will allow that, but we shall see.
I was going to say, you might need to talk to your bank manager about
that. Yeah. So my family still does live in Texas, and what's nice about it is basically when I'm back in Texas, the flight to Cancun is like, it's a 2-hour flight. They have deals all throughout the year. I'm hoping basically next time I go back, it's kind of like, okay, pop in, see my mother, my sister, my nieces and nephews for a week or two, and then, hey, I'm headed to Mexico.
So I've had enough of you now and go diving.
Yeah. We'll see what happens.
Cool. Just to answer my next question is, where are you at now? So you're full cave. Are you full cave CCR?
Yeah, full cave CCR. I would like to get back to instructing. It's kind of tough these days because I don't want to go and work for a shop that is just kind of pumping certifications out, right? I feel like with my level of diving, with the people that I've chatted with and educated myself with, I would want to teach at a higher standard, smaller classes. So kind of, and I realize that that's tough to go up to a business and be like, hey, I want to teach for you, but I want to do everything my own way and not your way. And I do feel that there are shops out there, but I feel like most of the shops that generally are kind of hiring, giving visas out, we're hiring a bunch of people. We're going to stick you with 8 people. You're going to do 2-day, 3-day open water certifications. And I'm not saying that's the case at all, but I would like to get back into teaching just kind of more on my own terms, and until I could find the right place. And maybe I'll end up doing like kind of like a independent instructor route, but it's always a little bit tough. So currently just right now, I'm still just taking classes, furthering my own education, but I would eventually like to get back into teaching because I enjoy it. I really do.
What do you think about the GUE recreational? Would that be a route for you as an instructor?
Yes, I would absolutely love to teach that way. I am a huge fan of how they teach their recreational pathway. Like basically, if everybody taught courses how they were supposed to be taught, buoyancy, trim, propulsion, there'd be no need for fundamentals. But the problem is people cut corners, whatever, blah, 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 blah. But their foundation, their core recreational, I'm a huge fan of. And if I went back into teaching, I would model it after GUE type teaching. Backplate and wing, long hose. It's funny because with the long hose, I was not against, but my recreational setup, I have just a recreational setup where I have a yoke. It's not my first regulator that I bought, but it's just my recreational, hey, I'm going single tank diving, tropical weather, whatever diving. I was kind of hard pressed to switch over to a long hose because I'm like, why? There's no reason to. I'm just going to be recreational diving. This past trip, I did switch over to a long hose. Now I'm sold on it, right? So now I'm like...
Game changer, right?
Oh, it is. It's huge. It's huge. And I've made that switch. I'll do a long hose now, and I see the benefits. I see it. But the big reason why I was kind of against it, especially if I was in a teaching environment, there's a lot of places that you go where they're not going to know what to do. If they're setting up your gear, which I generally set my own gear up, but most people look at it and they're like, what's going on? They're looking at it like, what is this long hose? Why do you have this long hose? For somebody that is that holiday diver, they only want to dive in tropical warm weather, which is a huge majority of divers. They're holiday divers. I was like, okay, I don't know if that's necessarily the right thing to teach them, because if they're just going to go and rent gear, nobody's renting a long hose setup, right? Nobody's, most places, right? Like it's all going to be the stupid yellow hose, the octo, blah, 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 blah. That's generally what probably 90% of the dive industry uses.
And the other 10% is BSAC, where the yellow hose comes from the left.
So that's what I'm saying. Me not teaching, I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to switch over to this long hose. I am a bigger fan of it. I have that reg. It's a yoke. It's not a din. I like dins, but I'm like, dude, yoke. Like, most people have yokes. Most people don't do din unless you're, I mean, different parts of the world. I haven't been over to Europe, which I think is probably mostly din. But
I was going to say, over here, you don't see many yokes.
yeah, depending on what you're doing, like, but I'm not going to throw away a perfectly good reg because it's like, oh, this is a yoke, And that's my whole thing is, yeah. So it's one of those things.
You throw away the first stage and get a decent first stage.
I was so pumped when I bought that. It's a Aqualung Legend, dude. I was like proud. I got the Legend. Now I'm just like fucking too many regs. I need to fucking give something away because I just have the maintenance issues are just way too much. But yeah, I would like to get back into teaching. I'm having a good time. Still continuing my education and just kind of see where that goes. I want to get more time in the cave. I want to get more time on the breather. I'd like to at least one point in my life be like, oh, I laid line in a virgin cave. This is pretty awesome. Nobody's ever been here before. But if I reach that point, awesome. If it doesn't happen, I'm pretty happy.
You got another 50 years yet, mate.
Hopefully, right?
Exactly. What's your worst dive? What's your best dive ever?
Worst dive? Oh, man.
And I've been thinking about this question, and I would have a problem answering the worst dive.
Yeah, the worst dive, I probably have moments in diving, but nothing that has ever really freaked me out. Just some bad dives. I mean, I could probably recall some bad. Best diving is always a little bit tough. Raja Ampat is probably my. Actually, see, it's always tough. It depends on what environment, right? Like Raja Ampat, I have absolutely amazing memories diving there. Some absolutely phenomenal memories that I'll take with me for the rest of my life.
Let's make the question a bit easier. If you were to tell someone who doesn't dive about a dive that should convince them to go diving, which dive would that be?
Raja Ampat, for sure. Raja Ampat. But then again, it's just, that's a hard question, man, because my last dive that I did in Mexico was one of the coolest fucking dives I ever did in the caves. We went to this area. It was I'm so bad with names, and I feel like she's probably ripped my head off if I'm saying this wrong. But it was an unmarked jump. So not a blind jump. It was an unmarked jump, and we went and did this jump. It's an exploration cave that only a few people have access to. And it was the most decorated thing. I felt like I was in an underwater cathedral. Like, it was a fucking religious experience. Oh, I'll tell you. Here we go.
There you go.
This was kind of like the dive that I like to talk about because it was all wrapped up in one. It was my last dive of full cave. And Vince basically was like, okay, the way that they go throughout the course is, you're doing a lot of stuff up until like your last dive, and then you basically plan and do your own dive. It's almost like in the recreational world, right? Where like your last dive, you plan, the instructor follows. And so he looks at a map and he's like, okay, we're gonna go search this area. I've never been here. We're going to go here. You plan the dive. So I'm like, okay, cool. And I'm looking on the map, and there's this big R. And we're planning to do, we're doing some stage. So, we're going to stage a bottle and then go in, simulated deco. And so I can't remember. It was a deeper section. It was an unmarked jump. And there's just this big R right on there. There's a big R, which means restriction. And it's this tiny little passageway. He's like, I've never been in here. It's restriction, and then it's also low visibility. I can't remember what it was. So I remember we go. I miss the jump. We turn around. We find it. He finds it. The salt water mixes with the fresh water.
Oh, the halocline.
Halocline, yeah. So the salt water mixes with the fresh water, like right where the entrance of this little tunnel is. And we go in. You can't see shit. We tie in. We're going in. I'm like, dude, I cannot see shit. He's behind me. And I'm just like, dude, this is horrible. I hate this. This is, I can't see shit. We're going really deep. My anxiety's like pumping. It's a dark cave too. It's just like it eats up the light. It's just such a dark cave compared to like a nice white, bright cave. We get down and it just opens up into this white, glowing tunnel. And I remember like all of my anxiety was lifted. I was like, holy shit, I'm in the videos that I've seen on YouTube, on Facebook, Instagram. Like, I'm in this video right now. The shit that I've only seen on TV, essentially. I'm in it right now, diving. And it was just this probably like, I don't know, maybe like 50-meter stretch of just this amazingly decorated white cave that not many people go into. I mean, you could tell it was very untouched. And then we pop in through a little hole, and it's like out back to the dark cave. And I'm just like, dude, I want to go back.
You want to go back
cave.
there?
Yeah. But yeah, there's that's kind of a tough one, because I mean, if I go back, I'm sure I could recall a lot of bad dives. I'm sure I could recall a lot of amazing, great dives. But and I feel like as I go through as I'm progressing, experiencing different new things, so it makes it that much better, I guess, because doing the overhead stuff was absolutely amazing. Like, I was so pumped the first time I went into a cave, and I was so pumped the last time I went into a cave, and I feel like it's only going to get more and more and more just because of the whole experience behind it too. I feel like is an absolutely amazing thing.
So, just getting back to the podcast, we've already spoken about why you did the podcast. It's just so you can drill people for information, which I think is a fantastic idea. It's the best way of doing it, and it's entertaining for everyone else as well. But what's the best piece of advice you've ever received from a guest on the show?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Well, let me say that there was a little bit of a joking around about that, getting information out of people. Honestly, and I think you can kind of sense this, I just like chatting to divers. I think every time I get to chat with a different diver, I learn something new. I really enjoy. It's something that I would do if I was diving anyways. I'm a chatty Cathy, whatever you want to call it. So I really do enjoy the aspect of just meeting different divers around the world and meeting a lot more experienced divers than me, and being able to chat and kind of pick their brain. And I feel like I learn something new every time I speak to somebody. And I've had some absolutely amazing guests on the show, so it's been really cool. But I think if I was to do one takeaway, is not to take things too seriously. And this is actually a quote. The first time I heard it, I've heard a few people say it, but the first time I heard it was from Natalie, and she used to close out a lot of her, like anytime she was being interviewed, or there's a few videos that I've seen, but her thought is just stay curious. Keep that curiosity going. Don't get complacent, but just stay curious and keep searching for, that next thing.
I like that. That's a good one. You always ask people, your interviewees, for a piece of advice. What would be your advice for anybody who wants to start a podcast and interview people? What would be your advice for interviewers?
Honestly, and this is going to sound so cliche and dumb, but just do it. Just start it. Just do it. I think that's the biggest, toughest thing is...
Well, I'm having to laugh right now because when you asked me this question, I think I told you exactly the same thing.
Oh, really? Yeah. No, it is, though. But it's the thing is, though, it's tough. That's probably why it popped in my head. It's in my subconscious. No. But no, it's a tough thing, because I have spoken to a few people that have wanted to start a podcast, and one, I think it's absolutely amazing. Like, please do. I think the more the merrier. But the biggest thing is to just get out there and do it, because it's and I felt it's funny because even in some of the Takeover episodes, I've noticed, like, it seems like, people that they're a little bit reserved, and I don't know, maybe like I still hate the way that I sound. Every time I edit, I'm like, dude, you sound like an idiot, Nick. Usually try to cut most of my stuff out.
Well, actually, I do feel bad for you now, because you've got about an hour and a half of listening to yourself.
You're gonna come back on. It's gonna be me just answering one-word answers. It's great. No. I think it's good. Yeah. But no, I think that's the toughest thing, is just set up a video call and chat. For me, the formula that works is I have tried the set list of questions. Obviously, going into most podcasts, going into most episodes these days, most interviews, I already kind of have like a Rolodex of questions in my head, right? Like, anybody that listens to the podcast knows it starts with the same question, ends with the same question. And generally, there's kind of the same questions that pop up here and there, right? Talk about your progression. But the reason why I don't like the structured form is because I just want to see where the conversation goes. I was doing an interview the other day, or actually I'm really behind. They'll all be released by the time this comes out, but I'm really behind on editing episodes. So this was like a few months back that I did an episode, and I was chatting with Steve Davis from Speaking Sidemount. We just ended up chatting about podcasting, and we even kind of made a joke like, oh, this is, we should probably get back to scuba diving. But if I would have had the structured thing, when it starts to go off, then that's when my anxiety starts to like come up, and I'm like, oh, I got to get back to the question. That's what I'm thinking, and then now I'm missing everything that they're saying. That's why I like my structure, is to kind of just see where the conversation goes. But yeah, I think that the first step is literally reach out to people. And I've even told people like, hey, if you're nervous about doing an interview your friend. I'm sure you have a friend that scuba dives. Just get them on the podcast. It'll seem natural. You'll have fun, and just interview them. You don't even have to interview them. Just have a conversation,
Cool. I like that. I know you always finish with the advice question, but I've got a final question for you, which I've actually stolen from the Big Scuba podcast.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Because when I was in Iceland last year, I basically spent 3 weeks listening to Big Scuba podcast. It was before I knew about off-gassing, so...
They're a great podcast. They're good. I like them.
Yeah, Ian and Gemma, they're lovely people. But they always sort of round off with, if you could go anywhere in the world, dive with anybody, they say living or alive, living or dead, who would you take with you? Where would you go? And why?
I would take Becca. Me and Becca would go somewhere. And anywhere in the world... 100%. The place that's been on my bucket list for the longest time is the Galapagos. I really, really want to get to the Galapagos. Actually, that's a tough one because I've heard God Pockets is pretty amazing. It's just some cold water diving. But if someone's like, hey, where are you going? Me and Becca, we'd fly out to the Galapagos and just do like a fucking 2-week liveaboard out there, man. I think it would be awesome.
That sounds like a great holiday.
Yeah.
I hope we have a great time. Enjoy it, Nick.
One day it'll happen. One day.
Any final thoughts?
No. I feel like my sweating has come down a little bit, Man, I didn't realize it's different being on this side of the chair. No, thank you, man. I appreciate the interview. I feel like I'm not the, most eloquent speaker or, but I feel like I've kind of got my story. It's funny because as I go through chatting about my progression and my journey, so many memories like pop up in my head, and I'm like, I want to talk about this. I didn't talk about that, which I wonder probably how most guests feel like. But it's kind of fun to go down memory lane. So this has been absolutely awesome. So I appreciate you suggesting to interview me. It was kind of a new one. I was like, damn, I'm going to be interviewed. Okay. But no, this has been a lot of fun, man. I absolutely appreciate it. You'll have to have me back on for round 2.
I definitely will have you back on your podcast. Don't worry.
Yeah. But no, man, this has been awesome, dude. So thank you very much. I absolutely appreciate it.
No, thank you for taking the time and for braving the experiment. Because, like I said, I thought it would be really nice to get some of your story rather than just like in dribs and drabs and having to listen through the whole podcast, every 737 episodes that you've got, to try and find out where you've been, what you've done. So no, I've really enjoyed it. It's been a blast. Thank you, Nick.
Off-gassing, a scuba podcast.